I gotta say that was super, super, super cool, man. It was like a story from the beginning to the end with the music and the stories that you were telling. I heard all styles of music in there, from like the 40s, the 50s, to you were yodeling at one point. That was awesome, man.
Get a little yodeling in for the aficionados when you can.
I like the non-alcoholic beer song. I have to say, so my friend, she works at a place where they gave a bunch of non-alcoholic beer out, like a bunch of Heineken.
Yeah.
So we got like a bunch of cases, and we were like, we should just host, like, we should be at a party or something. We go, oh, thank Heineken for sponsoring our event. And so the non-alcoholic beer thing made me laugh about that.
I was doing that during my live streams when the pandemic started. There's this brand called Athletic Brewing. It's a craft non-alcoholic brewery. It's like really good stuff, actually. This is not a paid promotion, folks. But I was drinking it in my broadcasts all the time on holidays and stuff. I'd be like, Athletic Brewing Company, sponsor me. I'm one of the few musicians that will boast about your beer on the on the airwaves.
So I've heard you play before with the band Vinegar Creek.
Yeah.
It was a real treat hearing you by yourself. It's a little different.
Yeah.
Are you the songwriter behind most of that music?
Yeah, I started Vinegar Creek after growing up mostly playing rock and roll music. I was in garage bands all my life, and it was like punk rock, or then we went through our psychedelic hippie, quasi-hippie type phase and everything. And then I started getting into Doc Watson and bluegrass and Del McCoury and Bill Monroe and stuff, and I started experimenting with like more folk bluegrass type of music back in my late 20s. And it was around the same time as I happened to meet all these great acoustic players living around town at different pickin' parties and stuff. So we just did a show. It was only supposed to be one show, and it ended up, here we are 15 years later, still a band.
You ever at Sam's Jam, the New Year's Eve?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I might have played with you there.
It might have been one of his parties where I met I don't remember who was the host of the party where I met the different band members, but
there was that one room down the hall to the left that had all the acoustic.
Yeah, are you talking about that old place, the Keppel building?
Keppel, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to love that.
Those were fun parties. Great music at those things. Good jams.
So what do you think inspired you to kind of, you said you were talking about getting into bluegrass. Can you elaborate on maybe why you got into certain bluegrass artists and, how you yourself use that to write your own style in that genre?
Yeah. Well, I guess after a number of years of playing in rock bands and hauling a full-sized Hammond organ up and down the stairs at various nightclubs, I love the sound of the thing, don't get me wrong. Not the most convenient load in and load out. I think something about the fact that the band could sound the same sitting around a campfire as on a stage of a club or, wherever we were playing, that really appealed to me. There's a simplicity to that, and kind of connecting to that American roots music, that early I grew up loving Elvis and the Beatles and stuff. That's what inspired me to start playing music, and these are the guys that inspired them. Like Bill Monroe inspired Elvis inspired the Beatles. So there's that continuum back there, and I guess I was just discovering that part of my own roots a little late, and I got really enthusiastic about it for a while and played almost entirely acoustic music. That's why I have more albums out with Vinegar Creek than I do under my own name, which I now hope to balance. Now I'm taking what I've learned in roots music and kind of bringing it back to where my own roots are, which is more in a rock and roll type of scenario, and still doing Vinegar Creek too. We're still playing together. I like to do a little bit of I like it that you notice different styles in that, because that's very much a conscious dabbling of in a bunch of different styles, because I listen to a bunch of different styles.
Well, what's your creative process like? Do you start with the music? Do you start with the writing?
It's kind of different every time, I try to just sit. The important thing is just to go to it. I've learned over the years that you have to sit down and try. You can't. It felt like when I was younger, I was just walking around waiting for inspiration to strike. And as you become as Stephen Pressfield says in this great book called The War of Art, a professional goes to work every day. So it's about sitting down and creating that space for songs to come down to. Oftentimes it'll be like a little bit of lyric, writing a little bit of melody that I then spin around in my head for a while until the rest of it emerges. So it's usually a little bit of both coming together. Sometimes I write all the music first these days. I think I very rarely write all the lyrics first. I like the melody to have some sound.
Well, I heard you in one of your songs, you talked about being inspired by climbing that trail and having
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I always say there's when people think of disasters, I always say, well, there's always a reason for everything. There's
Yeah.
always something good that can come out of something, and I feel like you take those opportunities and
Yeah.
run with it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what that song was all about. Like it wasn't something terrible that happened to me. It's not. There are a million things that could happen to you that are.
But the outcome was better than what happened.
But yeah, but
It was
but it
awesome.
was like something that might be aggravating or inconvenient or just kind of embracing whatever twist of fate you get and trying to find a way to find joy in it or adventure in it. And sometimes it's something minor like a vehicle breakdown. Sometimes you have something way heavier to deal with, and we still hope that we would have the presence of mind and the presence in our lives to turn that into a way to grow somehow.
So where did the yodeling part come into?
I listen to a lot of that old stuff like Jimmy Rogers and you ever hear Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman, the blue yodeler they called him. Oh, the yodeler. He was always he had all these blue yodel number. So that goes back another link in that chain I was just talking about, from Elvis back to Bill Monroe. And Bill Monroe, one of his famous songs was actually an adapted Jimmy Rogers song. Jimmy Rogers used to work on the railroad and he did a lot of yodeling and stuff, and Bill Monroe sped up his blue yodel, I forget if it was number 8 or 9, and turned it into Mule Skinner Blues, like a hyper speed with a bunch of fast rock star mandolin solos in it and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of yodeling back in that old folk music. Jimmy Rogers, Hank Williams had a bit of a yodel to him sometimes, Lovesick Blues. And I listen to a lot of that stuff, and it just kind of seeps. It all seeps.
I love that stuff. I got a funny story though, which is not really anything to do with the yodeling. My grandmother bought me this witch for Halloween that you hung on the door,
Yeah,
and you pushed the button and it yodeled,
I love that stuff.
and it would spit water
I
at
had a
you.
gargoyle like that.
Yeah, it would spit water, and I'm like, what is this that this lady's singing? I never heard anything like this. And then my grandmother told me about yodeling, and so I started researching this, and I'm like, wow, this
Nice.
is like a whole nother world.
That's an
man.
interesting way to come to it.
Yeah, I know. From a
You're
witch
singing
that spit at
witch,
me.
yeah. That's awesome.
Singing door witch.
Yeah.
I like that.
I had this gargoyle that was like that. You'd hit the thing and it would go, "Welcome, beware." And I swear the battery in that thing lasted for like 15 years.
It was
I moved through
possessed.
like 6. It was like supernatural. I moved through 6 different homes or 10 different homes or something in that time, and still every time I would unpack a box, I would hear it before I would see it. Welcome. Something
Probably
unholy.
still haunts you.
Unholy in the best possible way. I still got it. I still have it.
So if you could open up for any of your, like inspirations, like folk or blues or rock and roll, who would it be?
Do they have to be alive or?
They don't.
They don't.
They
Okay.
don't have to be alive.
I mean, I'm trying to think of, like, if I could open for Tom Waits, I would absolutely have some kind of a seizure.
The piano has been drinking.
Tom Waits or Bob Dylan, or of course, my favorite band of all time is the Beatles, and that hasn't been something that anyone has been able to do for a very long time since they stopped gigging in 1966. But of course, if it were possible somehow to bring John Lennon and George Harrison back from the dead and open for the Beatles, that would be number one. But yeah, Dylan would be interesting, except I don't expect it to be all that much fun. I think he would kind of be a drag. I know professional touring musicians who have like friends who have toured with Dylan, and they said it's pretty awkward in his presence. I feel like Willie Nelson would be a lot of fun. I idolize Willie, and it'd just be fun to hang out and smoke a joint with Willie or something. But I feel like you'd sit around at night picking. Probably not. It's probably just a fantasy, but that's all we're doing anyway, right? Fantasizing. Yeah. Willie Nelson would be near the top of that list
What are some of your favorite performances
that I've seen.
that you've played?
Or that I've played. We had and hopefully it'll be again. It's just a pandemic and some other financial issues and stuff have temporarily shut down the Roots and Blues Fest, but it looks like they're gearing up for 2021, which is cool. I hope that does happen. We've had some amazing shows there. We had our own little niche at Roots and Blues, the Vinegar Creek Constituency Sunday brunch show, and there was nothing else happening at the festival during Sunday brunches. It was just us. So we'd be playing in the big room back at Tellus 360, the Temple Room, and the first time we did it, it was like 11 a.m. We were like, nobody's gonna come to an 11 a.m. show, and the stage manager came in and said, "Are you guys done sound checking? Can we let the people in yet?" And I said, "What people?" And 500 people walked in. So every year we'd have these big crowds on Roots and Blues Sunday, and that was always a really fun, feel-good show. We had a really memorable set at the Philadelphia Folk Fest one time. And I guess I'd have to mention the time when Vinegar Creek first started recording together. It was around 2008 or something. We traveled to the Del McCurry, one of the guys I mentioned earlier, one of the bluegrass heroes who made me, inspired me to start playing acoustic and flat picking music and stuff. We traveled to his festival and played in the first ever band competition there, and we won it. So the next year we actually got to play on stage with Del McCurry, this guy who had inspired me to get into the genre to begin with just a few years earlier, which was very surreal. And we got a spot at the festival that year. That was a big one. I mean, man, there are so many gigs that have been so incredibly memorable and inspiring for very different reasons. Some of them were in dive bars for 2 people. Some of them were for big crowds. We opened for Senator Bernie Sanders 2 different times. Those were both really interesting experiences. Playing for thousands of people at a political rally. There have been so many. One of the reasons I value this as a way of life, playing music, is that there are just so many fascinating people and experiences that would never come to me but for this. And a lot of those have been just different things that have happened at gigs all over the country and the world. So I'm very thankful for it as a way to introduce me to things.
How do you think the internet has impacted the economy or the music genres today?
Well, there's a lot of everything now, and it's all available. Anybody can make their own stuff on an iPhone or whatever and put it out there instantly for anyone in the world to see. So that accomplishes a few things. In one way, it's really empowering for musicians that are independent like me, because I don't need to court record labels to get my stuff out there or anything like that. On the other hand, we have an economy where everyone is trying to get people's attention. That's the attention is the commodity, the main commodity. So in the pay attention to me marketplace, it's really hard to get people to pay attention to me. So I value it. I've got obviously I'm not well known. I've got a small but loyal fan base, and I'm able to connect with them directly through the internet, through subscriber platforms or through social media or whatever, and get my stuff that I make out to those people who are interested in hearing it. It might not be that easy to spread it far and wide, but it's all there, and there's something cool about that all of your work is there for people to enjoy if they just stumble on it.
Well, I want to touch on that, and I often hear, watching and listening to a lot of bands. It was a couple months ago. I was doing something with the Susquehanna Folk Music. I was being a judge for their upcoming artist thing that we had won a couple years prior or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they were doing it was all live stream. So I was like, okay, well, I better brush up on the live streaming thing, just so I can rate all the musicians not only upon their music and their online social media, but also how much time they took into consideration of how to get the setup right.
Sure.
So I'm watching all these things, and I'm looking at the person who ended up winning had the least amount of followers, least amount of visibility, and I looked at the thing and I was like, well, to some of these artists who have X amount and then X amount larger and X amount larger of likes, follows, and whatever, it's for them to have won would have just been one more, hey, this is just one more thing we can put on our bio, versus
Sure.
somebody else who is at a lower standard. And I want to point something out. When you say I have a small but loyal following and we can all converse with each other and it's kind of cool, that is the beginning of every sentence that I've ever heard anybody who has a large following say.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's a matter of time, effort, you getting your stuff out there, putting in the right veins and things like that. And I just want to, I don't want to belittle how important and imperative that is at every level for musicians in general. I think that's something that everybo's trying to do.
I 100% agree. And I've always said that my fans don't mean less because there are fewer of them.
Oh yes.
It doesn't mean less to have fans if you have fewer of them than if you have more. If there are people that care about what you do, then connect with those people, because that's one of the main reasons I think. If you ask any old rock star why they did it, they'll say girls or boys or whatever it is. But I think the real reason that we do it is connection, you know, for a lot of artists of various kinds. So it's there's no greater privilege to me, there's no greater honor than when somebody connects with something I've done. And, you know, just kind of staying with those people and forming relationships with them has been the most rewarding thing about, you know, being a musician. Because, like, you know, I've heard a lot of musicians say, well, I'd still be doing this if it was just me in my bedroom. And, like, okay, maybe I would too, but I wouldn't be doing it, you know, for hours and hours every day if it was just me in my bedroom. Probably I'd sing myself a couple of songs and then I'd move on. What really makes it special is those connections, and, you know, you have to cultivate those connections and relationships, because that's, you know, we're out here to talk to people and to,
maybe that's why every show is different, because there's different vibes in the room. There's different connections to these people, and I perform every time different. It depends on who's in the room.
Same here. I almost never even make a set list. I just kind of try to feel the vibe, you know. If it's more up, I try to go more up. If it's, you know, if sometimes somebody requests a song, and I know it, I'll play that song. I like to keep it kind of loose, and the same with my kind of rambling stage banter. You know, I've got a few stories that I tell variations on that go with some of the songs, but none of it's scripted, none of it's, you know, the same twice, because sometimes you're actually talking with a person in the room. They respond to something you say, and it takes the story in this direction or that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy that aspect of performing, and I often wonder if people who play stadiums are missing out on it, you know.
Well, and here's the other thing I want to point out on something that was said like a minute ago. The whole idea, like, oh, connection, this is why we do it. And I just want to express to people who aren't necessarily players but listeners of music, how that's something so interesting, how I feel the exact same way, like with the people I connect with, and I'm sure Jamie feels the same way with the people that he's played with in the bands and all that stuff. And it's so interesting that, you know, some people say things like, you'll say things like, oh, I want to play because I want to do this, and you'll hear all of these cliches, but that's the one cliche that when everybody says it, they all mean it from a very different place. You know?
I think you're right.
So I think that's really a very cool kind of thing. And also, touching on this note that you had about not doing something the same way twice, I personally know musicians on both ends of the spectrum. I know people who do their job and do it well and vary every time, and I know people who play the exact same show and the exact same set list and the exact same thing, and it's all about how you want to run and how you want to do your thing, and that's what really gives people their originality, because without the people who are doing it the opposite way, yours wouldn't stand out as much.
Absolutely.
You know, and vice versa.
There are some people who have carefully scripted shows where everything's exactly the same every night, and it's stellar. You know, I'm not saying that's not a good way to do it. It's just, you know, it's never been the way that I've done it. You know, now if I don't think that aspect of things would change, because I'm just way too off the cuff of a person. Right. You know, but it also would depend on what kind of venues you tend to be playing. You know, if you're playing to theater crowds, you know, musicians at like the small level where I am, you have to do things a little bit differently, because you're not always playing to an audience that entirely came to see you. You know,
you're right.
Sometimes you are, but sometimes you're playing for a restaurant full of people who went out because they like the fried chicken here, and they don't even know they're going to hear a band.
Mm-hmm.
So then your job is to reach those people, as many of them as you can. So it might require a different tactic than the theater show you played last month, where they were all your fans and they bought tickets. You know,
yeah,
and
exactly.
And they knew what they wanted to hear already, and you knew. So yeah, that's part of what keeps it exciting for me.
I think that wisdom, though, like being able to see that objectively and being able to do that is part of what makes certain musicians professionals. You know what I mean? That's one of the things that really add to their toolbox, you know? Like being able to have played for a varying amount of clients and a varying amount of businesses. It gives us an edge that not a lot of other businesses have, because if you think you're a business and you're working with this company or that company, you learn those people and then you have great relationships, but you hardly ever get outside of that. Like our networking is so vast because of that. And,
sure.
And we learn a lot of people related, you know, just, oh, this courtesy or that courtesy or this or that, you know, whatever you pick up along the way. I think having all those varying, you know, insights and different situations, I think it adds to our ability to become better at what we do.
It's definitely something you acquire over time, working as a professional musician and just doing gigs and gigs and gigs every year. You know, like I'm up to, you know, in the normal times, pre-pandemic, I was doing over 200 gigs a year just to make a living and everything. And you get it thrown into a lot of different circumstances, and you have to be nimble about how you respond to them. It's one of my favorite things about the whole gig is that it's like a tightrope act. You know, there is no safety net. You're in front of the people. Whatever you do is going into their ears, you know, in their eyes. So and sometimes you fall off of the rope, and sometimes you walk it with skill and grace, and that's what you hope for.
So, if you could change anything about the music industry, what would it be?
You know, over the past few years of my music career, I've really entirely kind of stopped thinking about the music industry almost. So it's hard to say. Like I could talk about things that would be better for me if they were different. You know, like I could say like, oh man, well, I wish like Spotify had a tip jar for musicians or whatever, or that we could make some money on that. But the fact of the matter is that my business model right now, and it's more of a personal philosophy than a business model, is just to keep my head that my business, my job is to make the best music that I can make to the best of my ability, and that's a full-time job. You know, that requires all my attention, and then get that music out to people who might be interested in it. Now we could talk for hours about how you do that, and part of how is the music industry. That's part of what helps you. That's the goal of it, right? Is to get it out to more people. That's important. But for me right now, I'm just kind of trusting the path. You know, like I mentioned during the set with the non-alcoholic beer song that I quit drinking, and a big part of that was I realized that I was never going to achieve my potential as an artist unless I let that go. I just wasn't, you know, because you can't be recovering from being drunk all the time or on the floor all the time or whatever and still be doing your best work. So you can do it maybe for a little while, but as the many dead alcoholic musicians in the world will attest, as their ghosts will tell you, it catches up with you eventually. So I recommitted to it then, and that's just my business model. Is I'm gonna try to get myself to where I want to be artistically. I'm gonna focus entirely on the work and on the people who are engaging with it, and try to grow that somewhat organically. I'm a single guy. I don't have any kids. You know, I live with my dog. I'd like to travel, but I have simple tastes. I've been making a living solely off music for years now. So would I like to make a better living? Would I like more fans? Would I like a bigger van with a softer bed in it? Like, sure, but you know, all good things in all good time, as that song said. I'm really enjoying the journey, and
that's what it's about. I was just telling him earlier.
Yeah.
My whole thing today was about the journey.
100%. Yeah.
About, like, you know, I was telling him about Mount Everest. How do you climb Mount Everest and carry all your materials? Well, you got to keep going up and down, and the more times you go up and down, the more you're solid on that journey.
And you set your camp each time and get a little bit higher.
Yeah, and I could take a helicopter to the top and take a selfie and say, hey, I made it, but what's the value in that? It's the journey along the way that you're learning about things.
And you meet a lot of interesting people and see a lot of incredible sights along that journey. And you know, I've played as a street musician around the world and traveled around the country, and music has been like a magic carpet. You know, I've had experiences and adventures and relationships that I never could have had if I didn't play it. So it's already been a pretty full trip, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen.
I wish fans and people that aren't musicians could know what it feels like to be rich on music.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
it's
well,
like,
I'd like to think we share a little bit of that with them. You know, I like to feel like on the other end, you know, I used to have kind of a habit of always feeling like, and this was just my own self-defeating thoughts and my own inner critic. We used to just always tell me that the people who were enjoying my music or who were fans were doing me a favor somehow, you know, almost as though I wasn't worthy. And there was a buddy out in Michigan who we used to stay with, and we'd play out there, and he'd be like, he sat me down one time when I was saying something about this. He's like, look, listen to me, man. Last night, me and my infant daughter danced around in the kitchen to your song, Imogene Loved a Sailor. He's like, you're giving us something too. He's like, you know, it's, and I like to think that kind of is feeling like what I like to feel like that separation between performer and audience vanishes to some extent when you're having a really good musical experience, and like they're the performer too in a way, and like you're the recipient too in a way.
Yes.
But I feel like, you know, as long as my bills are paid, as long as I can play music and my bills are paid, I'm like the happiest person in the world.
That's all I ask, man. It's a simple taste, you know.
If I didn't have music, that would be sad.
You know, in a lot of ways, I could sit around and count all the successes that I don't have. You know, like nobody writes about my stuff. I don't get a whole lot of radio play. I may never be famous in any way. I have no idea. I may be wildly famous next year. I don't know, but I already consider myself to be successful by my standards because I get to live this, you know, really interesting life, and you know and I get to play music for all these amazing people and get to know them a little bit too.
You said you were coming out with an album. Where can we look out for that?
Yeah, it'll be in all the usual places when it comes out. I'm hoping to finish the tracking on it this month, and then may the mixing and mastering may have to wait till I get back from my next little adventure around the country, which I'll be traveling.
Is this more stuff like what you were playing tonight?
A lot of the songs tonight will be on it. Yeah,
okay.
A lot of it's kind of a rock band arrangements. You know, I got to break out my Telecaster again, and
sweet.
And some of it's more acoustically oriented, but yeah, it'll be out on Spotify and Apple and all that stuff too. But I'll be selling, you know, I think my main channel of CD sales is still physical CDs at shows. So. And
you have a website?
Yeah, DiSanto.com. You can find all the stuff there. Vinegar Creek Constituency.com also, the band's website. You can get my solo album.
Well, if your band's still together in the future, I'd love to have the whole band.
Yeah, I haven't even been together with all those guys since before the pandemic. You know, one of the guys became a grandfather actually during the pandemic, so he was being extra careful. And we've done some duo and trio gigs, and one is a 4-piece. But you know, hopefully in the coming year or whenever it is, we'll have the 5 of us back on stage together again. It'd be cool. I'm sure they would all enjoy playing for
sweet.
You too. Yeah.
Not that, I mean, your performance was different. It was one of a kind, but I also want to hear what you sound like with the rest of the guys.
Oh yeah, it's a very different thing, I think. Yeah, it's a different kind of sound. We've been playing together for a long time, and we've got something a bit rough-hewn and irregular, but it's something.
Leo, thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you guys.
Yeah,
it's
thank
been
you.
a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
All right, well, until next time, peace out.
Hey guys, it's Justin
and Jamie
from Creative Sound Studios Online. We really appreciate you guys tuning in, subscribing, and watching these local artists perform.
We really do this from the bottom of our hearts, and with your support we can continue to help performing artists and musicians. So if you'd like to donate, there's a donate link on the website. Only give what you can. I really think you're going to enjoy what's coming up. And once again, we thank you.